Zane Rivers had been traveling through the galaxy for months, mapping out distant star systems. He was alone, as always, except for the hum of his ship and the occasional data logs to keep him company. A part of him enjoyed the silence. There were no orders to follow, no deadlines to meet, just the vast, endless space around him. But despite the peace, a feeling of loneliness crept up on him now and then. One quiet morning, as the stars blinked softly outside his ship, a strange signal flashed across his console. It was faint, barely detectable, but it was enough to catch his attention. A distress call. Zane leaned closer to the screen. It was an old signal, originating from a ship in a nearby sector. There wasn't much data, just a few broken words, and coordinates. Without thinking twice, Zane adjusted his ship's course. It was another day in the life of a deep space explorer. Little did he know that this decision would change everything. When Zane arrived at the coordinates, he found something unexpected. The ship that had sent the distress call wasn't just damaged, it was wrecked. Parts of it floated in space. Debris scattered like a shattered dream. His heart raced as he carefully piloted his ship through the wreckage. He had no idea what he might find, but something in his gut told him to be cautious. Zane activated the ship's scanners and quickly identified life signs. They were weak, but they were there. There were survivors. His mission was clear. Rescue them no matter what. Following the weak signals, Zane found the survivors in a small, cramped escape pod that had somehow detached from the main ship. Inside, 4 alien girls lay unconscious, their bodies bruised and battered, but alive. Zane's first instinct was to act quickly. He carefully brought the pod aboard his ship, securing it in the medical bay. He rushed to their side, his hands trembling slightly as he checked their vital signs. They were alive, but only barely. The first girl, Elira, had pale blue skin and delicate wings that shimmered slightly in the low light. Her long silver hair was tangled, and her body looked fragile. Zane immediately set to work, stabilizing her condition. As he did, he noticed the other girls. The second girl, Tessara, was strong-looking, her skin a dark green and covered in intricate, battle-worn markings. She had sharp features and a warrior's stance, even while unconscious. Zane had no idea what kind of species she was, but her posture told him she was no stranger to conflict. The third girl, Ari, looked different from the others. Her skin was silver, almost glowing, and her eyes were closed, her expression soft. Her hair was long and white, a stark contrast to the rest of the group. Zane could sense a strange calm about her, even in her unconscious state. The fourth girl, Lena, was unlike the others. She wore a suit of armor, heavily dented from battle, and her deep red skin suggested a species known for their resilience. Her face was hidden behind a visor, but her body language spoke volumes. She was ready for battle, even if she was completely unconscious at the moment. Zane worked tirelessly, administering medical care to each girl. They needed time to heal, but he was confident he could get them to a safer place. His ship was equipped with advanced technology that could keep them in stable conditions for a while. After hours of careful work, Zane finally stepped back. All 4 girls were stable. Their injuries were severe, but nothing that couldn't be repaired with time. He took a moment to sit, staring at their unconscious forms. He had rescued them, but what now? Zane sat down in the cockpit, staring out into the void of space. The planet ahead was still far away, and the journey was going to take some time. He needed to know who these girls were. They were from different species, but they had to be from somewhere important. No ordinary group would be traveling in a wrecked ship in such a dangerous part of space. The next few days were quiet. Zane made sure the girls were well cared for, feeding them and monitoring their recovery. It was strange, taking care of 4 injured strangers. But there was something about them, something that made him feel like he had to help. It wasn't just because they were helpless. It was something deeper. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Elira opened her eyes. Her gaze was unfocused at first, but when she saw Zane standing by her side, her eyes cleared. She gasped and tried to sit up, but Zane gently stopped her. "Don't move too much," he said softly. "You're safe now." Elira looked at him, confusion in her eyes. She was clearly disoriented, but something about her expression told. Zane she had been through far worse than this. She had been a leader, maybe even royalty, but now she was a survivor. "Where am I?" she whispered. Zane smiled reassuringly. "You're on my ship. I found you. You were in trouble, and I brought you aboard." Elira's eyes flickered as she processed his words. "You saved us?" "I did," Zane confirmed. "I'm Zane Rivers. What happened? Who were you traveling with?" Elira's face clouded with sadness. "My people," she began, then trailed off. "Our ship was attacked. I don't know. Who did it? We were just trying to escape, but the others..." Zane felt a pang of sympathy. It was clear that whatever had happened to her people had been devastating. Before he could ask more, Tessara stirred and sat up abruptly. Her sharp eyes locked onto Zane, sizing him up in a heartbeat. "Who are you?" Tessara demanded, her voice filled with suspicion. "I'm Zane Rivers," he said again, standing firm. "I rescued you from the wreckage." "Rescued us?" Tessara repeated. "You? Why should we trust you?" Zane didn't back down. "Because I saved your lives. You were unconscious, and you needed help." The tension in the room thickened, but Elira's calm voice broke through. "Tessara, he's telling the truth. He helped us. We owe him our lives." Tessara hesitated, then nodded, but her posture remained guarded. The other two girls woke up, one after the other. Eri blinked her silver eyes and smiled softly when she saw Zane. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice like a gentle breeze. Lena, however, didn't speak. She just nodded curtly and adjusted her armor, as if ready to get back to business. Zane looked at all four of them. He could see the different personalities and backgrounds of each girl, but one thing was clear. They were survivors, and they weren't used to being in anyone's debt. "Where are you from?" Zane asked gently, eager to understand them more. "We are from different worlds," Elira said, her voice strong despite the weakness in her body. "But now, we have no place to return to." Zane nodded slowly. The girls were lost, stranded in space with nowhere to go, and it was his responsibility to get them to safety. Little did he know, this was just the beginning. The bond that would form between him and these four alien girls would be tested in ways he never imagined. They would face danger, betrayal, and the deep-seated question of what it truly meant to be human. But for now, Zane had done what he could. He had saved them. And somehow, that was enough. For now. The days that followed were filled with quiet moments and steady healing. Zane continued to take care of the four alien girls, ensuring that they had everything they needed while the ship made its way through the deep void of space. But there was something more that began to happen. As time passed, Zane started to understand them, not just as survivors, but as individuals. Zane's ship, the Stellar Voyager, was equipped with a high-tech medical bay and a fully stocked kitchen, but even these couldn't fully fill the emptiness that came with the journey. It wasn't just about the ship anymore. It was about the girls and the bond that was slowly forming between them all. Elira, who had been the first to wake, spent most of her days in quiet contemplation. She had been the leader of her people, a royal who had seen much of the galaxy. But now she was stranded, vulnerable, with no home to return to. Zane would find her in various places on the ship, staring out the window into the endless stars. He could tell that her mind was elsewhere, grieving for the loss of her people, her kingdom, and the life she had once known. Zane couldn't help but admire her strength. Even in her weakened state, Elira held herself with dignity, never allowing her pain to show too much. There was a sadness in her eyes that he couldn't quite understand, but he respected it. She had seen war, loss, and destruction, and yet she still held on to hope. One evening, as the stars sparkled outside the cockpit, Zane found Elira staring at the endless expanse. Her long silver hair floated gently around her face, and she looked as though she were lost in thought. Zane hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Do you ever stop and think about what you're going to do next?" Zane asked, gently. Elira turned to him, her expression softening. "What do you mean?" Zane sat down beside her, his hands resting on his knees. "I mean, we're heading to your homeworlds. But what happens after that? Do you have a plan?" Elira's lips parted slightly, but no words came out at first. Then, in a voice that was barely a whisper, she spoke. "I don't know. I've never been in a situation like this before. I was always a leader, always someone people looked to for guidance. But now, I'm just a girl, stranded in space with no one to guide me." Zane leaned back slightly, his eyes meeting hers. "Well, if you ever need help with that, you've got me. I'll stick around." Elira's eyes softened, and for the first time, she smiled. It wasn't a big smile, but it was enough for Zane to see that there was more to her than just the hardened warrior he had first met. Beneath the royal exterior was a girl who was scared, who had lost everything. Meanwhile, Tessara had been slowly warming up to Zane. At first, she had been distant, her natural wariness preventing her from fully trusting him. But as the days went by, she began to see that Zane was different from the others she had encountered in her life. He wasn't just a warrior or a soldier. He was someone who cared, and that was a rare thing in a galaxy like this. One afternoon, Tessara joined Zane in the training area. Zane had been practicing some combat drills, and Tessara had offered to show him a few techniques from her warrior culture. She was a master in hand-to-hand combat, and Zane had always admired her strength. "So, you're telling me this is how you fight?" Zane asked, amused. Tessara smirked. "You humans like to make things complicated. This is simple, fast, efficient." She moved with the grace of someone who had spent years in battle, every motion fluid and precise. Zane was impressed. He had seen a lot of fighters in his time, but Tessara was different. She had a raw power, a fire in her that he could feel, even through their training. After an intense round of sparring, Zane wiped the sweat from his brow. "You're good," he said, breathing heavily. Tessara gave him a nod. "You're not bad yourself." They stood in silence for a moment, catching their breath. Zane could see the respect in her eyes, and he could feel a growing sense of trust between them. Tessara wasn't used to relying on others, but with Zane, she was starting to realize that it was okay to let her guard down sometimes. Eri was the quietest of them all, but her presence was no less important. She had been the last to wake, and when she did, she was eerily calm. Zane had noticed her almost immediately. Her silver eyes seemed to look right through him, as if she could read his thoughts before he even spoke. Eri was a telepath, and though she didn't share her abilities freely, Zane could feel the connection between them. One evening, as Zane was preparing a meal in the ship's kitchen, Eri approached him. She had a soft, almost ethereal presence, and Zane found himself drawn to her quiet strength. "Do you need help?" Zane asked, looking up from the stove. Eri shook her head, a faint smile on her lips. "No, I'm just observing." Zane raised an eyebrow. Observing? Aries' smile deepened, and she leaned against the counter, her eyes meeting his. You're not like the others. You care about people, not just about the mission or the job. I can feel that. Zane paused, his hands stilling over the pot. I'm just doing what anyone would do. I don't think it's that special. Aries laughed softly, the sound like a breeze through trees. You're too humble, but I can tell. You care for us, more than you realize. Zane didn't know how to respond. He had never been one to think much about his feelings. But Aries' words stirred something in him. He had been so focused on survival, on getting them to safety, that he hadn't stopped to consider how deeply he was connected to them all. Lena, on the other hand, had been a mystery to Zane. She didn't say much, and her cold exterior made it difficult to gauge her true feelings. But over the days, he began to notice the subtle changes. The way her shoulders relaxed when she wasn't in her armor. The way her eyes softened when she wasn't so guarded. One day, Zane found her standing at the ship's observation window, her hands clasped behind her back. She didn't turn when he entered, but Zane could tell she knew he was there. You're thinking about something, Zane said, walking up beside her. Lena didn't respond immediately. Instead, she stared out into space, as if the answer were out there somewhere. I've always been alone, she said quietly, her voice low. My people. We don't form bonds with others. It's considered weak. Zane's gaze softened. But you don't believe that, do you? Lena turned to look at him, her red skin almost glowing in the light. No, I don't. Then maybe it's time to change that, Zane said with a small smile. For the first time, Lena gave him a small, genuine smile in return. The bond between Zane and the girls grew stronger with each passing day. They were no longer just four, strangers, but a team, each of them bringing something unique to the table. Zane had always thought of himself as a solitary traveler, but now he realized that he didn't have to be alone. They had become his family in a way, each one of them offering him something he never thought he needed. Connection. As they journeyed through space, the stars outside grew brighter, and Zane's heart began to feel lighter. Whatever happened, next they would face it together. And for the first time in a long time, Zane felt like he belonged. The journey through space was always unpredictable. But Zane had learned to embrace the unexpected. The stellar Voyager glided smoothly through the stars, its advanced systems humming softly as it carried Zane and his four companions through the dark expanse. The alien girls had grown stronger with each passing day, and the bond between them deepened. They spent time together, training, talking, and getting to know one another better. Zane felt a sense of peace he had not experienced before. There was still uncertainty about what lay ahead, where they would go, how they would face the dangers of space, or if the girls would ever truly find their people. But for now they were safe, and they had each other. It was a few weeks into their journey when disaster struck. One evening, as the ship passed through a quiet sector of space, a sudden violent tremor shook the vessel. The lights flickered, alarms blared, and the ship's systems began to fail. Zane rushed to the control panel, his heart racing as he tried to assess the damage. Zane! Elira's voice crackled over the intercom. What's happening? The ship's shaking. I'm not sure yet, Zane replied, his fingers flying across the controls. Something's wrong with the engines. I need to get to the main reactor. He turned to the girls, who had gathered in the common area. Stay here. I'll be back as soon as I can. Just stay safe. Without waiting for a response, Zane raced to the engine room, the ship's hull groaning with each passing second. As he arrived at the reactor, he found that the damage was worse than he had feared. The core had been overloaded, and the ship was leaking energy. If he didn't fix it soon, the stellar Voyager would be doomed. Zane opened the panel to the reactor, his eyes scanning the damage. Sparks flew, and the heat was intense. He quickly realized that the reactor was unstable. With the girls on board, he couldn't risk blowing up the ship. His mind raced as he formulated a plan. He needed to reroute the power from the damaged systems, but it would take all his skill to do it without causing a catastrophic failure. Back in the common area, the girls could feel the ship trembling beneath them. Elira, Tessara, Ari, and Lena exchanged uneasy glances. They knew something was wrong, but none of them were prepared for the danger Zane was facing. The ship wasn't just shaking, it was fighting to stay alive. "I have to help him," Tessara said, standing up. "We can't just sit here and do nothing." "I agree," Elira said, her voice steady despite the fear that crept into her mind. "But we need to be careful. Zane is doing everything he can." "I'm going to help," Lena said firmly. "We all are. He's done so much for us already. It's time for us to return the favor." Ari nodded, her silver eyes glowing softly. "We'll do whatever it takes." The four girls moved quickly, gathering what little equipment they could find. They weren't sure what they could do, but they knew they had to try. They followed Zane's path toward the engine room, determined to help him however they could. Meanwhile, Zane worked tirelessly in the engine room. Sweat dripped down his brow as he pulled apart the damaged systems, his hands moving with precision. The heat was unbearable, and the sparks from the reactor made everything feel like it was about to explode. But Zane's focus never wavered. He had no choice but to keep going. With each passing second, the ship grew weaker. He could feel the energy draining away, and he knew that time was running out. The Stellar Voyager was a high-tech vessel, but even the best ships had their limits. "Come on," Zane muttered to himself, his fingers trembling as he worked on the control panels. He knew he was close. Just a few more adjustments and he could stabilize the reactor, but every move had to be perfect. One wrong calculation, and it was over. Just as he was about to reroute the final power grid, the door to the engine room slammed open, and the four girls burst in. "What are you doing?" Zane shouted, his voice filled with urgency. "Get out of here! It's too dangerous." "We're not leaving you," Tessara said, her voice full of determination. "We're going to help you. You've done so much for us. It's time for us to do the same." Zane hesitated for a moment, looking at the four girls. They were all standing there, ready to help him. He had always been the one to take charge, to protect them. But now, in the face of danger, they were ready to fight by his side. He took a deep breath. "Fine, but we need to work fast. If we don't fix this, the ship will explode." The girls nodded, and Zane quickly explained what needed to be done. They each took positions around the room, assisting him in rerouting the power and stabilizing the reactor. It was a risky plan, but it was the only one they had. The tension in the room was palpable as the girls worked alongside Zane. Elira used her quick thinking to help adjust the energy flow, while Tessera's combat skills allowed her to handle the physical strain of the repair work. Ari's calmness under pressure helped keep everyone focused, and Lena's technical expertise came in handy when they needed to patch up the damaged components. Zane couldn't help but be amazed at how well they worked together. Despite their differences, they were able to combine their unique abilities to achieve a common goal. It was like they were becoming a real team, each one of them contributing in their own way. Minutes passed like hours, and Zane's hands ached from the constant work. Sweat soaked through his shirt, and his eyes burned from the strain. But finally, after what felt like an eternity, they managed to stabilize the reactor. The ship stopped shaking, and the lights flickered back to normal. The alarms that had been blaring just moments ago faded into silence. "We did it," Zane said, his voice filled with relief. "We're safe." The girls let out collective sighs of relief, but none of them smiled just yet. They knew that while the crisis had been averted, they had no idea what else the galaxy had in store for them. But for now, they had survived. They had worked together, and they had won. In the aftermath of the crisis, Zane took some time to assess the damage. The ship had been severely affected by the overload, but the reactor was stable for now. He would need to make some repairs, but the Stellar Voyager was still operational. It would take some time to get everything back to normal, but they had time. The girls, though exhausted, were eager to help in any way they could. They had proven themselves in the face of danger, and Zane felt a newfound respect for each of them. They had not only fought beside him, but they had also saved the ship. Their teamwork had made all the difference. As the ship glided smoothly through space once again, Zane couldn't help but reflect on what had happened. They had faced a life-or-death situation, and they had come through it together. It was a bond that couldn't be broken, at least not easily. Zane knew that the road ahead would be filled with challenges. There would be more dangers, more uncertainties, and more obstacles. But with the girls by his side, he felt ready to face whatever came next. They weren't just survivors anymore, they were a family, and together they could conquer anything. The days after the crisis passed quietly, but the tension in the Stellar Voyager was palpable. Zane had managed to make the necessary repairs, but the ship was not yet fully stable. He still had a lot of work to do, but the immediate danger had passed. The girls, Elira, Tessara, Eri, and Lena, had returned to their daily routines, but their faces were filled with uncertainty. Their lives had been completely upended, and while they had survived, they were still far from home. There was still so much they didn't know. Zane couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. The way the girls had worked together so seamlessly in the face of danger had left a lasting impression on him. They were stronger than he had first realized. He knew they weren't just survivors, they were capable, determined, and ready for anything the universe threw their way. But the question remained, what would they do once they reached their homeworlds? What kind of welcome would they receive? Were they even wanted there anymore? Zane stood by the observation window, gazing out at the stars. He could see the faint outline of a nearby planet, their next destination. It was a place he knew all too well, a neutral world where anyone could go, regardless of their origins. It was a place where the girls could find refuge, at least for a time. But Zane could feel the weight of their uncertain futures pressing down on him. The first to approach him was Elira. She had been quiet lately, more distant than usual. Zane had noticed the change, and it bothered him. She had been strong and regal, a leader in her own right, but now she seemed almost lost, like a part of her was missing. Elira? Zane turned to her as she approached, her long silver hair flowing softly behind her. She didn't meet his gaze immediately, but Zane could tell she was struggling with something. "I know what you're thinking," Elira said softly. "We've made it this far, but where do we go from here?" Zane took a deep breath, unsure how to answer. He had been thinking the same thing for days. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I'm here to help you. You've been through a lot. I'm not going to leave you now." Elira looked up at him, her blue skin almost glowing in the dim light. "I know, and I appreciate that, more than you know. But there's something you need to understand, Zane. I wasn't just a leader. I was a princess. My people, my kingdom, they were everything to me. And now they're gone. We're scattered, lost." Zane felt a pang of sympathy. He couldn't imagine what it must feel like to lose everything, but he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't let her give up. "You don't have to face this alone," Zane said, stepping closer. "We'll figure it out together. I promise." Elira's eyes softened, and for a moment, she allowed herself to relax. "I hope so." Later that day, Zane found himself working in the ship's cockpit, checking the navigation system. The girls had spent most of the day quietly in their quarters, and Zane had given them some space to think. He knew they needed time, but he also knew they couldn't keep running forever. The galaxy was a dangerous place, and the longer they stayed on the fringes, the more likely it was that someone would come looking for them. As Zane ran a diagnostic on the ship's systems, Tessara walked into the cockpit. She had been the most independent of the group, always keeping to herself. But Zane had noticed a change in her, too. There was a softness to her now, a vulnerability that hadn't been there before. She was a warrior at heart, but even warriors had their moments of doubt. "You've been quiet lately," Zane said without turning around. "Everything okay?" Tessara leaned against the doorframe, her arms crossed. "You could say that," she said, her voice low. "I've been thinking about everything." Zane turned to face her, sensing the gravity in her words. "What do you mean?" Tessara sighed, her dark green skin reflecting the dim light. "When I was a child, I was trained to be a warrior. I was taught to fight, to survive, to protect my people. But I was never taught what to do when it's all gone. I never learned how to live without a purpose." Zane stepped forward, his voice gentle. "You've found a new purpose. You've been helping us. You've been helping me. That matters." Tessara met his gaze, her sharp eyes searching his face. "I don't know if I believe that. I've spent so long fighting for a cause I believed in. But now I'm not sure what I'm fighting for." "You're fighting for your future," Zane said firmly. "You don't need to have all the answers right now. Sometimes just surviving is enough." Tessara looked away, her expression unreadable. "Maybe you're right, but I don't know how to move forward. I've never had to face something like this." Zane nodded, understanding. "None of us have, but we're in this together. We'll figure it out." Tessara didn't say anything else, but the way she looked at him made Zane think she believed him, at least a little. The next few days were filled with preparation. The planet they were heading toward was a neutral ground, a place where refugees and wanderers could seek shelter. But it was also a place of uncertainty. While it was safe for now, Zane knew they couldn't stay forever. The girls needed to find their people, or at least a new path forward. One evening, as they sat around the ship's small dining table, Zane noticed the change in the girls. Elira, Tessara, Eri, and Lena all seemed quieter, more introspective than usual. They were each struggling with their own doubts, and Zane could feel the weight of their emotions hanging in the air. Lena, who had been the most guarded of them all, finally spoke up. Her red skin glowed softly in the low light, and her voice was steady. "Zane, we need to talk," she said, "about our future." Zane looked at her, his heart racing. He had been waiting for this moment, knowing it was coming. But now that it was here, he wasn't sure what to say. "We've been through a lot together," Lena continued, her eyes meeting his. "And I'm grateful for everything you've done for us. But there's something you should know. We've all been thinking about what comes next, and we've realized something." Zane's pulse quickened. "What is it?" Elira, who had been sitting beside Lena, spoke next. Her voice was calm, but there was a fire in her eyes. "We don't want to go back to our old lives," she said. "Our people, they're gone, Zane. And even if we find them, we're not sure they'll accept us. We've been through too much. We've changed." Tessara nodded, her eyes reflecting a mixture of hope and fear. "We don't want to live in the past anymore. We want to live in the future. A future with you." Zane's heart skipped a beat. He looked around the table at the four girls, their eyes filled with determination. They were all saying the same thing, in their own way. They didn't just want to survive. They wanted to build something new. With him. The weight of their words hit Zane like a wave. For the first time since their journey began, he realized what they were asking of him. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about something deeper. Zane swallowed hard, his voice thick with emotion. "Are you sure? This is a big step. I don't want to drag you into something you're not ready for." Elira reached across the table and took his hand, her grip strong and steady. "We're ready. We've been through so much, Zane, and we've come to realize that we don't need to go back. We just need to move forward. And we want to do that with you." Zane looked at each of them, Elira, Tessara, Ari, and Lena, and in their eyes, he saw something he hadn't expected. Hope. Hope for a future together. In that moment, Zane knew. This was the beginning of something new, something real, and no matter what came next, they would face it together. The stellar Voyager had reached its destination, a neutral planet, far from any major conflict. It was a place where refugees, wanderers, and those who needed a fresh start could seek refuge. The planet itself was an unassuming, peaceful world. Green, fields stretched for miles, and the sky was a soft blue, dotted with drifting clouds. It was the perfect place to rest, to take a breath, and perhaps to decide what came next. Zane had set the ship down in a quiet, uninhabited area on the outskirts of a small town. The settlement was simple, with few buildings and even fewer inhabitants. It was a place of quiet lives, and for now it seemed safe. The girls, Elira, Tessara, Ari, and Lena, spent the first few days adjusting to their new surroundings. They explored the town, walked along the peaceful rivers, and took in the natural beauty of the planet. For the first time since their journey had begun, they could let their guard down. They were not hunted, not in danger, at least for now. But Zane could see that there was a heaviness in the air. The girls, while grateful for the peace, were still uncertain about the future. They had all been through so much: loss, fear, survival. But now, the question remained. What came after that? What did they want from the future? Zane spent time with each of them individually, trying to understand their thoughts, their desires, and what they wanted from the life they had left. Slowly, piece by piece, he began to understand that they had all changed, not just in terms of survival, but emotionally, spiritually. They were no longer the people they had been before the shipwreck. They were stronger, more certain of themselves, and for the first time, they allowed themselves to hope. One evening, after the sun had set, Zane and the girls sat together outside the ship. The stars stretched out above them, twinkling in the vast, silent expanse of space. It was quiet, peaceful. Zane sat on a rock, his legs crossed in front of him, while Elira stood nearby, her wings fluttering gently in the cool breeze. Tessara leaned against a tree, her arms crossed, while Ari sat on the ground, her eyes closed, seemingly lost in thought. Lena, as always, remained standing, her posture strong and unwavering. It had been a long, difficult journey, but Zane could sense that a shift was happening. The girls were no longer simply grateful for his help. They had begun to see him differently, to value him in ways that went beyond mere survival. Elira, who had been quiet for most of the evening, stepped forward. Her eyes met Zane's, and he could see the intensity behind them. "I think we've all been thinking about what's next," she said softly. "We've been through a lot together, and I believe we've all changed. But we need to decide what we want now, what we want from each other." Zane nodded. He had been waiting for this moment, the moment when they would speak openly about their futures, about the choices they had to make. He had already known in his heart that he didn't want to let them go. He didn't want to face the future alone. Ari, who had been sitting quietly, opened her eyes and spoke, her voice calm but firm. "We've all learned something over the past few weeks. We've learned to trust each other, to rely on each other, and we've learned that there's something deeper between us, something more than just gratitude or friendship." Zane's heart skipped a beat. He knew where this was going, but he wasn't sure if he was ready for it. "I agree with Aerie," Tessera said, her voice strong. "We've all been through so much, but we've come out of it together. We've built something strong here, something that can't be easily broken. But we need to decide what we want to do with it." Zane looked at each of them, his mind racing. "I've always believed that life is about survival," he said, his voice steady. "But since meeting you all, I've realized it's more than that. It's about connections. It's about what you build together. And I want to build something with you." Lena, who had been quiet until now, stepped forward. "We don't need to go back to our old lives, Zane. We've already lost so much. But together we can create something new." Elira's voice was soft, but it carried the weight of her emotions. "Zane, I don't know what the future holds, but I do know this. I want to be with you. I want to face whatever comes next with you." Tessera nodded. "We've been through too much to turn back now, and I don't want to turn back. I want to go forward with you." Zane felt the weight of their words, the sincerity in their eyes. He could see it. Each of them had changed, had grown in ways he hadn't anticipated. They were no longer just survivors. They were a family, bound by more than just circumstance. But it wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about love, trust, and a future they wanted to build together. Zane's heart was pounding as he stood up, looking at the four girls who had become so much more to him than just the survivors of a wreck. They were his family now, in every sense of the word. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "I don't know what I can offer you, except my heart," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I can't promise that everything will be easy, but I can promise that I'll be here. I'll be here with you every step of the way, and I want to be with all of you, if you'll have me." The silence between them was heavy, but it was the kind of silence that held hope. Elira stepped forward first, her blue skin glowing softly in the moonlight. She reached for his hand, her grip warm and firm. "We want you, Zane," she said, her voice steady. "We want to be with you, all of us, together." Tessera and Aerie moved closer, standing by Elira's side. "We're not just asking for your help anymore," Tessera said. "We're asking to be part of your life, a part of your future." Lena, who had been standing back, now stepped forward and placed a hand on Zane's shoulder. "We don't need to be alone anymore," she said softly. "We don't need to face the world alone. Not when we have each other." Zane's heart swelled with emotion. He had always been independent, used to doing things on his own. But now, with these four incredible women by his side, he realized that he didn't have to do everything alone anymore. He looked at each of them, Elira, Tessera, Aerie, and Lena, and he knew, deep down, that this was where he belonged. This was his future. With a deep breath, Zane smiled. "Then I guess we have a lot to look forward to," he said. "Together." Elira smiled, her wings fluttering gently. "Together," she agreed. Tessera's face softened, and for the first time, Zane saw the true warmth in her eyes. "We'll make it work," she said. Aerie nodded, her silver eyes glowing softly. "Yes, together we can face anything." Lena, who had always been the most reserved, gave him a rare smile. "This is just the beginning, Zane," she said, "the beginning of something beautiful.